So let's talk about computer accounts and also automating account management. So basically a computer, um, when you have a computer that is on a domain, it has to be joined to the domain before it can leverage all of the advantages of using a domain. And some of those advantages are users can do single sign-on, which means that they can be at any computer and use the same logon credentials that are centrally managed. They can search the Active Directory, for objects like printers and things like that, and user accounts. Group policies can be applied to computers that are joined to the domain, so you can have or you can enforce your IT security policies, for example, using group policy, but only when a computer is joined to the domain. And you can remotely manage computers when it's on the domain. It becomes much easier because all of the permissions and that trust exists. So accessing a computer remotely becomes rather arbitrary instead of having to try to track all that stuff manually. So, of course, we really can't leverage the power of Active Directory without having our computers joined to our domain. So this is an important part of maintaining Active Directory, is having making sure our computers are joined to the domain. So basically, computers can be created in Active Directory in two different ways. You can either a user changes the computer membership from workgroup to domain in the system's properties dialog box. So from a computer itself, you can go into computer management and you can join your computer to the domain, or an administrator can create the account manually in Active Directory so that that device is a member of the domain. So it can be done either way. The latter, the first one rather, is probably more common for me. I usually just go into the computer and add it to the domain. Or once I have an image, I make the image a member of the domain. So anytime I spin up a new image, it's added to the domain. But this is basically what the dialog box looks like if you're going to do this from within Active Directory, if you're going to create a user account. So you can change a default computer account logon. So the computers folder can have group policy linked to it. You should move the computer accounts to an OU that you have created. Change the default account location using the redirect CMP command, which you see here. So joining a domain, on the computer that you're joining the domain, you go to the computer name tab in the system's dialog box. You click change, and then you click domain option, and then you type the name of the domain that you want to join, and it will prompt you for some credentials that have permission on the domain in order to join it. You can't just join a domain without having permission to do so. So you'll have to provide some credentials that are able to do so. That way, somebody can't just walk into your network and join their computer to your domain without, actually being a member of the organization. So if the computer account does not exist already, it's going to get created automatically. As long as the domain user account has the right to add workstations to the domain. So whoever is logging in that dialog box from the computer properties, as long as they have permission, it'll create that account, that computer account. So typically we're not creating computer accounts manually. It's happening automatically when a device is added to the domain. You can also do it from the command line. So there's the command to add a computer to a domain without having to go into the properties dialog box, and you can also do it with the command with the PowerShell. So there's also a PowerShell command to do that, which you can see here. And again, these make it a little bit easier to do this with things like batch files or automation. You can join a computer to the domain offline as well. There's a couple different reasons you would do this. It might be for a computer that is not that you're not able to connect to the network yet, but it will be connected. It could be for virtual machines, mobile devices that are outside the organization that will eventually be in the organization. So you can do an offline join to the domain, and there are two different ways to do that from the command line using the djoin command, which you can see here. All right, so once we have accounts, you may need to manage those. So it might be necessary to reset a computer account. So if the computer account has become unsynchronized with the domain controller, you can reset the computer account so it'll resync. So to reset, you're going to right-click on the computer object in Active Directory Users and Computers, and then click Reset Account. It'll leave and then join again, and it'll be reset. Some folks think you have to do that manually from the computer. You have to go into the remote computer and manually take it off the domain, reboot it, then when it comes back up, join it to the domain again, and then reboot it. It's important to note that if you do that from the properties dialog on the client itself, you do have to reboot each time, but you can also do it this way. Sometimes this works and is a little bit faster. You can disable a computer account. For example, if a computer is no longer in the organization and it's never going to be connected again, you might want to disable it, or or if it's going to be temporarily away from the network, you might want to do that. So there is a way to disable on the computer, so it won't be able to log in. A user would not be able to use that computer to log in using their domain credentials until it gets re-enabled. So you can prevent a computer from connecting to your domain if you need to for some reason. And finally, let's talk about, in this slide deck, talk about automating account management. There's another slide deck in this unit, but this is the last part of this slide deck. In the next slide deck, we're going to talk about group policy and the Windows firewall. So you might want to automate account management. In many cases, we have a lot of users that we have to add. So there's some ways to bulk import and export Active Directory users. Some of the commands that you can use to manage user accounts: dsadd, dsget, dsmod, move, query, dsrm. You could type the /? after a command so you can see what all the options are in that command. So dsadd, for example, would be to add an object to Active Directory. So there are some, and you can see here the syntax for some of those commands. One of the important things, your book talks about using piping, so it's important to mention here. Basically, all piping is, you type a command, you can pipe it to another command, like the more command, which would allow you to page through. This is important with user accounts because if you have thousands and thousands of user accounts, they're just going to stream by on the command prompt without you being able to look at those. But if you pipe the output of a command to more, for example, it'll allow you to page through the results from a command without having to cache it and then go back and review it somehow. So you can manage accounts with PowerShell as well. So there's some commands in PowerShell. One of the cool things about PowerShell is the what if switch, which will basically run the command, but it won't actually do anything. It'll just show you the result of running that command. So you can kind of see, okay, what if I run this command? What's going to happen? Is it going to work? Or what error am I going to get back? So you can use that to kind of help. So here's a list of some of the commands that you can use in the PowerShell to help automate user account management, which I'm not going to require you to memorize these for this course, but it's probably good to memorize this table if you're going to take the certification exam with Microsoft. There's some commands that you can use as well to import and export user accounts. The CSVDE and LDIFDE commands can both be used for this. So the CSVDE can be used to create objects in Active Directory. Usually that would be from a CSV, which is a comma-separated value file. So that's sort of like an Excel spreadsheet. If somebody gives you an Excel spreadsheet of user accounts and says, go create these for me, then you can use the CSVDE command, but you would have to convert that Excel spreadsheet into a format that can be read by the command, which is really just CSV. The other one is LDIF. What's neat about LDIF is, and I'll fast forward here because there's some slides to talk about this, but LDIF is basically a language you can use to query lightweight directory access protocol. I'm sorry, LDAP is. I should probably explain a little bit. I don't know if we covered this in the previous course, but LDAP is like Active Directory, but it works across different vendors, right? So Active Directory is a Microsoft technology, and it works very well in the Microsoft ecosystem. But if you have a Linux machine or if you have Mac OS or something like that, then they would use LDAP, and you can enable LDAP in Active Directory. The LDIF command will allow you to query any Active Directory server that has LDAP enabled. So here's the thing about the LDIF command. You can't use the LDIF command if you don't have LDAP enabled on the Active Directory server to which you're doing this query. But why would you use this? Let's say I've got a domain somewhere that has a whole bunch of user accounts that I want to migrate to a different domain. You could use the LDIF command to do that. So the CSV tool would allow you to import and create user accounts from, say, a spreadsheet, but LDIF allows you to read the user account information from one server and then write it into the other server. Where this is nice is if you have a common schema, a lot of those properties that we talked about in managing user accounts can also be automatically transferred when you use the LDIF command. It's a little bit easier. All right, so that's it. So that's it for the first slide deck. There's another slide deck where I'm going to cover group policy and Windows Firewall, but in this slide deck we covered user accounts, groups, as well as computer accounts, and then a little bit about how to automate those accounts.